Yes, hello my friends. It's another beautiful day. We are up here in northern Arizona, getting out of the valley heat for the weekend, and decided to do a little bit of a walk and talk, to get outside, spend some time in nature. And as I was driving up, I got to listen to the Tucker Summit, which I thought was really quite excellent. Some fun memes going around. If you missed it, the Blaze hosted this all-day event where there were 6 different GOP primary candidates all having conversations with Tucker Carlson. And Tucker went through them one by one. And there's this meme going around like Tucker is the Grim Reaper, just taking out candidate after candidate. And they went through all 6. And so I wanted to run through some of the highlights on this thing because it was quite good. I thought it was very different than some of the other town halls and debates that we get. And so the day started off with Asa Hutchinson. And he came out, the big takeaway, the big clip that is spreading around with Asa is the COVID question. So Tucker asked him, how many jabs have you taken?
And how many COVID shots did you take, and how do you feel about it now, in retrospect?
How many COVID shots did you take?
0.
And Asa didn't really like that question. He said that he wanted to just get back to the other topics, but it was a little bit of a fiery exchange. And I'm not sure that Asa is going to go anywhere as a result of that conversation, but it was the first candidate out, and so the Grim Reaper meme has him being taken out because he didn't answer that question appropriately. So always kind of thought he was a long shot. We'll see if he gains any traction, but he was the first one out of the gate, and it was a little bit of a spicy conversation with Tucker. The next conversation was with Tim Scott. We know he has just recently announced, and Tucker had some good questions for him. They were talking about Ukraine, and we didn't really know where Tim Scott sat on this as a policy. And we were all trying to gauge, is he going to be pro-settlement or is he going to be pro-victory of Ukraine? You know, what is the distinguishing feature of his policy position as it relates to Ukraine? And so when Tucker asked him about it, here's what he said.
Well, so here's, I'm just interested because all measures are relative. So Russia's bad, Russia's a threat, Putin's evil, got it. But the total body count from Russia in the United States is right around 0. Like, I don't know anyone who's been killed by Russia. I know people personally who've been killed by Mexico. The government of Mexico allows fentanyl to be made in its country and to come over our border.
Yes.
And remittances from Mexico are a huge part of their economy. The Mexican government is party to the murder of hundreds of thousands of Americans. So why is Mexico less of a threat than Russia?
Well, 2 things. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Okay, but
Yeah, and frankly, here's
no Americans killed by Russia,
Yep.
hundreds of thousands killed by Mexico, but Mexico's our ally and Russia's our enemy. How does that work?
well, I'm not going to pretend like the legislation I have sponsored and I would sign as President of the United States freezes the assets of the Mexican cartels, targets the Mexican cartels, and hopefully eliminates the flow of fentanyl. Because I do agree with you that 70,000 Americans losing their lives on an annual basis is an existential threat to America that we can solve. We don't have to choose the good news.
Would you be willing to say to the Mexican government, your economy runs on factories right over the border, car plants, for example, but many other manufacturing plants, and we're just going to slap tariffs on that and tank your economy, like tomorrow, unless you stop allowing poison to come into our country? Like, why not do that?
I say you use every tool available to stop fentanyl from coming across our border. No exceptions.
Interesting.
And so largely kind of non-committal, talking about a Ukrainian victory, but saying that they might have to negotiate some of that territory in the Donbass region. But little different than what we've seen from some other people, let's say in the Biden administration, whose posture on this is that the only victory can come from total defeat of Russia, meaning Crimea's, goes back to Ukraine, Putin gets tried in the International Criminal Court, and so on. Might be one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is the Ukrainians have to give up some territory and negotiate some land, and Russia's got to give up some some other land or territory or rights, as a part of a settlement, and some people are talking in that way. So we're trying to figure out where people fall on the spectrum. And Tim Scott kind of came out and gave what I would consider to be kind of a non-committal, middle of the road answer, which didn't really, I think, change much for him. So his opportunity there to stand out and jump out of the pack, I think, was missed, but he didn't hurt himself like some of the other candidates did. One of the other candidates who did get hit with a hard soundbite was Mike Pence. And Mike Pence, we played this clip on the after party, and we were trying to understand what he was going for here. But he got asked about American cities crumbling as it relates to Ukraine. You know, we keep spending all of this money on Ukraine and $100 million packages every month or so. We know those totals are rising to the billions of dollars. And so Tucker brought up a point with Mike Pence, and he was pretty aggressive about it. All right, I know you keep talking about saving Western democracy and all of those things, but what about American cities?
Along the way, the Biden administration has been slow in providing military support. Make no mistake about this. We promised them 33 Abrams tanks in January. I heard again 2 weeks ago in Ukraine, they still don't have them. We've been telling them we'll train their F-16 pilots, but now they're saying maybe January we'll let somebody transfer some jets.
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President, have you, I know you're running for president. You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. And yet, your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. I think it's a fair question to ask, like, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern. I'm running for president of the United States because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think
And Pence says there, not my concern. And if you listen to the rest of the clip, he goes on to explain that he does care about American cities and that a democracy or America can do two things at the same time. So he goes on and he kind of explains it as though we can walk and chew gum, we can take care of American cities, but we can also protect American interest abroad as we're fighting in Ukraine. But the soundbite is just brutal, because the not my concern statement is what is being clipped and spread all over the place. And I think it is his concern. You know, American cities crumbling are everybody's concern. And whether the soundbite is fair or not, it was something he said immediately after. And I think in the rest of his answer, he tried to paper over it and say, no, we can care about cities, but a lot of people are just, I think, keying off on his, not only the words, but almost how he said it and his body language with Tucker. He was very uncomfortable. And he goes after Tucker almost saying, I've seen this little shtick of yours before. Not my concern. Oh, man. Well, that may be what the donors want to hear and what the Republican Party bureaucrats want to hear, but that clip is spreading around like wildfire all over the internet. And when he first said that, I was trying to understand what he was trying to get at. Was this like a federalism argument where he was going to be saying, I'm the president and I got to take care of the country, but the cities got to take care of the cities, and that's not my concern what's happening in San Francisco or something? But it was just a weird thing to say. And then he actually posted a tweet about that clip. He didn't reference it as a gaffe or a flub, but he did talk about it as being, his tweet filled in the rest of the context, saying that I think we can basically do both. And I don't think that Mike Pence doesn't care about the cities. I think it was probably a bad phrase, and he was just a little bit probably on his heels because Tucker was coming after him in that way. But sometimes when you're under that pressure, your true colors come out and you reveal how you feel about these issues. And so when he said that, it didn't feel good. It's like, whoa, all right. So Ukraine is more important than American cities? That doesn't feel right. Certainly a presidential candidate wouldn't say something like that. And so Mike Pence, I'm sure will try to come back from that. But of the day, that was a big flub for him. I mean, I think that was the clip that got the most traction on Twitter. Everybody was retweeting it, and we were at a loss when I first saw the clip. What is he trying to get at there? And I think it was just him being frustrated with Tucker and then going on to his answer, but it was a really bad statement. And I think that's really what people will take away from Pence. And so that was the first half. Those were the first three people that came out. And Tucker was pretty hard, pretty aggressive with them. And then the second half, things kind of lightened up a little bit. We had some good conversations. Nikki Haley came out, and Tucker was, I think, a little bit softer with her. She is somebody who's very, I think, practiced with her scripts and her talking points. She seemed very polished in her delivery. She got caught off a little bit on the question about who blew up Nord Stream. Tucker asked her specifically. This is something we've talked about on the show a lot.
Who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline?
I mean, I don't know.
I'm not claiming you did it.
No.
I'm just kidding. No, I don't know. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Do you know who did it?
Seems pretty obvious. It was backed by the Biden administration, I would say. I mean, I think all the evidence suggests that, but I wasn't there. But I mean, that seems like a huge step. This is the largest industrial sabotage in history, sent more carbon in the atmosphere than any act ever. And like, there's weirdly no curiosity about who did it. And I think that's strange. What do you think?
There's a lot of things that are strange with the Biden administration. This isn't the first one.
I guess what I'm really saying is, if you were running against the Biden administration, to do something like that and shaft our closest allies in the world, which would be Western Europe, and deprive them of the energy they need to run their manufacturing sector and destroy their economy, which it is in the process of doing, like, that's a major sin to have done something like that. You just betrayed our allies, and no one on the right is accusing the Bidens of what they clearly did. So I don't know why.
Seemed pretty obvious from our perspective who would have the incentives to do that. It didn't seem like the Russians would blow up their own pipeline when that was their justification to encourage Europe to negotiate so they could just turn the switch back on so the gas would come back over. If they blow up their own pipeline, they lose that leverage. And so we were all very questionable about the official narrative that they told us, that they released. None of it seemed actually accurate. So it's a fog of war. We don't know what the answer is officially. We know what everybody says it is officially, but Nikki Haley got asked and she couldn't commit to it. She said, I don't know who blew it up. Tucker said, well, I think these people did. And it was an exchange where I think Nikki Haley couldn't really give an answer because a lot of the GOP base, I think, knows there's more to that story, but the mainstream war side of the party, they want endless war. And so that narrative has to be supported to further those ends. Now, Nikki Haley also got asked a question about the elections, and she gave a weird answer where she said that there was all sorts of shenanigans and weird things happening, like mail-in ballots and legislatures changing some of the voting rules. Courts and secretaries of states changing some of the election rules outside of the legislature, and that being essentially illegal from our perspective. Now, she said it was weird stuff and that in her state they shored a lot of this up, and she talked about voter ID.
As a mechanical question, it's not a trick question, it's just like the mechanics of it, something you're thinking about since you're running. I don't think anyone would say Joe Biden was a great candidate.
No.
Didn't campaign.
He didn't campaign at all.
He was not a figure who commanded respect among Democrats. They made fun of him. I'm not attacking the guy, but that's true.
Right.
Nobody in Washington said, I want my kid to grow up to be Joe Biden. And yet, at the end, he's got 81 million votes. 15 million more than Barack Obama, who, whatever you think of him, was a very talented politician, and I think smart. So, like, how did he do that? And what can we learn from that?
Well, what you can learn from it is what we did in South Carolina. I said in South Carolina, if you've got to show picture ID to buy Sudafed, if you've got to show picture ID to get on a plane, you should have to show picture ID to protect the integrity of the election process.
So,
And we have to make sure election integrity is something we don't ever stop. You have to continue over and over. We've had some states who've done some great things and they've put voter ID in place, and that's been great. We still have some other states who haven't done anything, and we need to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to. I mean, we saw during COVID, a lot of secretaries of state changed rules without getting state legislative support. We saw a lot of that happening. We saw a lot of mail-out balloting. We've got to make sure we continue to fight to make sure we have integrity in the election process. Because I saw at the United Nations, when you have your people lose faith in an election system, that's the first crack of a country falling apart. We have to keep fighting for this. We have to make sure we get it done.
yes. So when I asked about this 81 million votes, you immediately said things I think I agree with about election integrity. Yeah. So are you suggesting that last election, it sounds like you're saying you don't think it was on the level?
Are you talking about the presidential?
That's correct, the presidential.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we all know that there were irregularities in there and that there were some issues that happened. We know that there was mail-out balloting that shouldn't have happened. Do I think that changed the results of the election? No. I mean, I think President Biden ended up winning the election. But I think at the end of the day, it showed we've got a lot of work to do in terms of election integrity.
So you mentioned mail-in ballots. Would you restrict that if you're president?
Yeah, I don't.
And all of these things are all nice little buzzwords that they throw out. And then we are supposed to believe that's a solution and that that's going to fix this next election. So it sounds good. It sounds fun. But then they asked her this final question. So, Tucker says, do you think that Joe Biden is essentially legitimately elected? And she said, well, yeah. I mean, long story short, yeah, there was a bunch of weirdness, but he is a legitimate president, more or less, was the takeaway that I got from that exchange. Got a little dust coming this way. We'll head back up. But it was an interesting exchange with Nikki Haley. I don't think there was any real positives or minuses. I think she kind of came out neutral, steady as she goes. There was another exchange with Vivek. He was the next person, the next candidate who came out. And I really liked his interview with Tucker because it felt different than all of the others. And I think it's because he is a little different than all of the others. A lot of these people, all of them, are lifelong politicians. And so they have a certain sound to them. Oftentimes I think they talk to us like we're idiots or 5-year-olds. And they explain things, not as bad as Kamala. Kamala came out and explained artificial intelligence to us. AI. 2 words. And sometimes politicians have that tendency, and we saw a lot of that yesterday, but we didn't hear so much of that from Vivek. And what I liked about his conversation was that he went up a level. So he talked a lot about vision and about identity and about who we are as Americans. And I think that's super important, and I don't think we talk enough about it. And I think this probably comes from Vivek's background in business. In this exchange, he talks about American identity and how important it is that we get back to clarity on what that is, because all of the other things that we talk about, all of the other problems and solutions that exist are not functional if they're not rooted in an identity. Here's Vivek.
if we're willing to take the shackles off a little bit, relax a little bit on thinking, identity can be confining. Right? The left does this masterfully. You're black, therefore you can't achieve something. You're a woman, therefore you can't achieve something. Identity's confining. You can be imprisoned in the identities that you inherit. And I just want to be careful that we learn from the left, or learn including what not to do, to be confined and imprisoned by our own identity of what it means to be Republican. Let's just let that word go and instead ask the question of what it actually means to be an American today. That's the question of our time. And you ask people my age that question, you get like a deer in the headlights response. It's like, it's a blank stare initially. But on the other side of that is then an introspection to say, okay, there are certain ideals that we fought a revolution for in this country. Self-governance over aristocracy, sovereignty as a nation, free speech, meritocracy. That you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and contributions. That's what it means to be an American. That's what we're running to. And honest to God, Tucker, I think that if we do this right, if we actually prioritize our vision, what we stand for, I think it's going to be a landslide election for I'm not going to say Republican candidate, a pro-American candidate in this race.
It's just
What I like about Vivek there is he gets to the root of the issue. I think a lot of the time, politicians and leaders talk about things that we should have. We should all have this, or everything should be equal and free this and free that. It's like possessive things. It's talking about the things that we do. We should do this and do that. We have to do this and we have to do that. But there are very few conversations about who we are. And in my life, I was taught this framework from my coach about this be, do, have model, these 3 buckets. A lot of the times we talk about what we want to have. I want a nice house, a swimming pool, a lot of money. And our solutions are around that. What do we have to do to get these things? And so we do the things that we think we need to do to get the things. And our politicians talk a lot about that. What we should have, what the government needs to give us, all of that stuff. Then there's another bucket, which is the do bucket. I feel like I have to do all of these things. And then if I do these things, I will have those things. But that's only part of the equation. It really starts with who we are being. What kind of a person are we being? Because that's where it all starts. If you are a person who bees and is a certain way, exists a certain way, then you'll do certain things that are in alignment with that state of being. And then if you do the things that are in alignment with the state of being, you'll have those things that you want. So it's be, do, have. What kind of person am I being? At the core, person of integrity, honesty, passion, drive, compassion, empathy, all of those characteristics of a person at being, if those are anchored in, then they can translate into doing. Because a person who has integrity is going to do things honestly. And if you're an honest person and you do a bunch of things honestly, then you'll have the things that come from an honest life. But sometimes we skip all of that, me in particular, and you jump right into the doing or the having rather than the being. And so Vivek talked a lot about that. And I think it's really important because a lot of the other politicians only talk about the doing and the having without paying attention to who we are. And it's very hard to get solutions in that way. How do you know what you should have or what you deserve or what you should be doing if you don't know how to be, if you haven't defined what your state of being is? So when Vivek talks about that stuff, I think it's very, very important. And this is something we've talked about on the show a lot. How can we have a unified country if we have opposite states of being, if we have different ideas of what it is to be an American, or what the Constitution says, or why things like free speech are important, or even agreeing on pronouns and stuff like that. We have differences at a fundamental level of what being an American means. And if you have that big disconnect, you'll also have divisions in the doing and the having. And so I really like that. I thought it was very inspirational. I'd like to hear more of that talk from our politicians, because I think one of the most important things for a political leader to do is to lead and to inspire people and to help remind people that there is a better way of living with a values-based approach, not politicians just promising everybody everything they want to hear. Oh yeah, we're going to fix mail-in ballots. Okay. Well, why though? Well, it's because we want a state of being that's better. We want to be a country with fair elections. We don't want to just have ID checks. Yeah, it's one part of it. That's nice. But that's part of a bigger thing. And I think other politicians just miss that. So I like that from Vivek. He also had a great conversation about January 6th. Tucker asked him about this, and he said that it had to do with being censored, with not having voices heard, with being thrown out of the conversation by the political bureaucrats who run the elections, who decide what we can talk about, what we can question. And when people are not heard, that's when they start to act. And that's what caused January 6th.
So let's just go through the list. Another thing you can't say is that maybe January 6th, while appalling on one level, maybe it was not an insurrection.
So let me talk about, I haven't talked about this much in the campaign. I'll be very honest with you. You want to know what caused January 6th? There's such a temptation to say that there's one man whose name is unspeakable. We can't.
No, first of all, it's QAnon. It's QAnon.
It's QAnon. You want to know what caused January 6th? Is pervasive censorship in this country in the lead up to January 6th. You tell people in this country they cannot speak, that is when they scream. You tell people they cannot scream, that is when they tear things down. And so the reality is, we were told that you could not question where the virus came from when we all knew it came from a lab in Wuhan, which now they admit. We were told that you could not send a private message to someone on the eve of an election that Hunter Biden's laptop story was actually a true story worth considering before an election. You were systematically suppressed. So think about this. You told you had to be locked down, had to take a vaccine that was mandated and forced down your throat, stay locked down in your home while Antifa and BLM roam and burn the streets of this country. So that's the lead up of one full year of telling people you have to shut up, sit down, and do as you're told. And then you tell them, okay, there's an election where you didn't get the information that you needed, such as the Hunter Biden laptop story being real and suppressed. That's what caused January 6th, is a cycle of censorship in this country. And until we look ourselves in the mirror and admit truth on that, we will not move forward as a country. And I think that's the real cause. And we're not, and I'm sorry to say this, Tucker, but I think until we reckon with that reality, I worry that is the beginning of, it's a friendly parley compared to what's to come, unless we step up and speak truth, restore integrity, and actually lead us to who we are as a people, rather than sweeping the truth under the rug.
And again, I like that he's talking about it. I think a lot of the other candidates are trying to ignore January 6th, trying to forget that it's their problem. It's just Trump's problem. And if it hurts Trump, it helps them. So the standard narrative is something that if it serves them, why would they contest it? But Vivek didn't play that. And I think he does get to the root of the problem, at least in part. I think there's also a lot of corruption in the intelligence agencies and a lot of people who are perfectly happy seeing something like this happen. And so Censorship, yes, but more than that. That wasn't it alone, but it is a major contributing factor, and I like that Vivek is talking about it. The final candidate was Ron DeSantis, and he was pretty even-keeled, I think. They saved him for the end, and he got some pretty standard questions. He was asked about what happens if Newsom runs. Do you think Biden's going to be the nominee? And Ron said, happy to put Florida up against California. And he got another question about a 6-week abortion ban bill, which he got to tout in Florida, and something that he said that he would favor as president, and he would sign that. And so these are questions that I think he's very capable of answering. He got asked a question from Tucker about CBDCs, which I think is a critically important issue. And here's what Ron said about that.
So how concerned are you that in the wake of whatever the next economic disruption that we're going to face is, and everyone kind of feels like maybe there's something coming, that will wind up with digital currency issued by the central bank?
Well, if I am the president, on day one, we will nix central bank digital currency. Done, dead, not happening in this country. In the state of Florida, because the Fed has been talking about this.
Oh, yeah.
And what the Fed said was, well, you know, we wouldn't do it without consulting the legislative and executive branches. Ideally, we would get a law passed. No, 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 no. That's not how the Constitution says. It's only ideal that you get a law passed. You would have to get a law passed. I don't think Congress would pass that. So I think the Fed may try to do something unilaterally. So what we did in Florida is we basically passed a law that says we do not recognize CBDC in the state of Florida. And I think other states are probably going to follow suit. That will jam their ability to do it through executive action. They don't have authority to do it. There'd be lawsuits and everything. For those who don't know what CBDC is, what they want to do, and this is tied in with like Davos, World Economic Forum, all these people. They want the Fed, they want to get rid of cash. They want no cryptocurrency, and they want this to be the sole form of legal tender. And they have said this publicly at like Davos and these other places. It will allow them to prohibit, quote, undesirable purchases like fuel and ammunition. And so the minute you give them the power to do this, they are going to impose a social credit system on this country. CBDC is a massive threat to American liberty. On January 20th, 2025, it goes to the ash heap of history in this country.
So if you were to become president, and previous presidents have discovered this, so you and the vice president.
And it was a good answer. CBDCs are a menace. I think they are going to try to unroll those for the country because they've mismanaged the old system. So they're going to need to onboard us onto some new structure to keep things solvent. But I don't know if that is a major issue for most Americans, if they're aware of this, or if this is going to be the issue that sets Ron DeSantis apart from the pack. So I think that he did a good job. I don't think that there were any real positives or negatives that deviated his mission. And it was a pretty standard conversation. So I don't think he hurt himself or helped himself in any real way. That wrapped it up. So that was all 6 of them. Obviously, the big missing person there was Donald Trump. And we wonder if that dynamic is going to change, why he sat this one out. Obviously, he's ahead in the polls by a massive amount. And so he's got no real obligation to show up. He is the heir apparent and the de facto nominee as of now. And so he doesn't have to make any sudden moves. They have to make moves and break out of the pack. And so it feels like this is almost like a race for second right now. And then as the primaries continue, we'll see if it closes, if that number 2 position is able to break out and close the gap with Trump. But it was a great, great production. I mean, I thought the Blaze did an outstanding job. It was one of the better conversations that we've had in a long time. Way better than I think what we saw from a lot of the cable companies with their town halls and their debates, which all feel scripted and bullet pointed. This felt pretty organic. Felt like we got some real conversations and we got to learn a little bit about the candidates. So shout out to the team at the Blaze. It was really enjoyable. They did a little like sports analysis almost, it felt like, in between the interviews, which made it fun and lively. And I think this is a really great development for alternative media. We've got a ton of amazing clips that are being spread around from this conversation. And it captured a lot of eyeballs. And I think it's going to be good for the conversations that we're trying to have here in this country. So shout out to Tucker, who, by the way, was up there for like 8 hours interviewing some very smart people with poise for hours. It's very impressive. And so something to aspire to. But my friends, it was a beautiful conversation. If you haven't listened to it, you might want to check out the rest of it. But I hope you're having a beautiful, beautiful weekend, making it a great day, hopefully connecting with some friends, some nature, maybe a little bit of sunshine out there. Here, we'll get you some. There you go. There you go. Now I can't see anything. Hopefully you can. But my friends, it's a beautiful day. We'll be back to talk about whatever else is in store for us on the next one, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.